All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Amber Smith, and on behalf of Evolving in Education, I just want to tell you how grateful we are that you came today. So we have an exciting presentation today by Katie Broadbent. She is the Chief Empowerment Advocate at Prenda. So Katie, if it's all right with you, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Okay, hi. Hey, everyone, and hi to everyone who will watch this recording as well. I'm Katie Broadbent. I'm the Chief Empowerment Advocate at Prenda. Prenda is an educational company that helps people start micro schools. So we do K through 8th micro schools of think between 5 and 10 learners, like really tiny learning environments led by guides who some are professional educators and others are not professional educators. Over the last 5 years, we've helped over 1,000 people start these very small schools, and we've helped almost 10,000 learners. So we're really excited to unpack all of the things that we've learned through that journey. We run a very student-centered, empowerment-focused program. It's very personalized. It's highly focused on connection and relationship and mentorship, and helping students own their own learning. So that's kind of our focus. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the principles that we should all be thinking about as we move forward in evolving in education's mission in helping create the future of education. And so I'm not going to talk about specific curriculum that I like or anything like that. We're going to talk about principles to drive the creation of future curriculums, or the incorporation of already existing curriculums into the future. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to talk about the brain. And I just want to say that I'm not a neuroscientist, and I know that there are neuroscientists here at Evolving in Education, so I will defer to them. But I gotta click the right buttons. Here we go. Okay, can everybody see this okay?
It's still loading. Oh, yes, I see it.
Good now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when we think about creating curriculum, we really want to keep the brain at the center of this of the learning. It's really easy to talk about workbooks and ed tech and all of this stuff when we're talking about curriculum, but I want to stay really focused on the learning science and what kids need in order to thrive, right? It's not just what curriculum is going to get them to understand fractions, but what holistic approach to learning and to curriculum is going to drive their long-term love of learning, their motivation, their self-perception of themselves as a learner, and to foster those adult-child relationships that are going to be sustaining and nourishing to the child throughout their life. So that's what we're going to talk about. But first, we're going to talk about little babies, because babies are adorable. They're so cute, and everybody loves babies. They're so squishy, right? Oh, they're so cute. This guy is my favorite. They're just growing up, learning things. They're so fun to watch. And then, bam, all of a sudden they're a moody teenager that doesn't want to listen to you or do their homework. And they're super not motivated. And they're just like, whatever, dad, whatever, mom, don't care. And my question is, how the heck did we go from here to here? Right? There's a big gap. And so I kind of want to just zoom out and watch the slides again and talk through kind of a closer look. So, and we're going to get some audience participation here. So feel free to unmute and we'll have a little discussion. What is the first thing that this little baby needs? Fresh out the womb, what does it need? The first thing.
Mommy.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What does it need seconds after it's born? What does it need to do?
Breathe.
Being held.
Very close. Yeah, it needs to breathe first, right? And once it's breathing, and sometimes babies can breathe by themselves, but sometimes they even need help doing that, right? But then what are some of their other needs? We've heard mom, being held. What are some other things this baby's going to need in say the next 15 minutes?
Milk.
Yeah, food. The baby looks kind of cold. What's it going to need?
Blankie.
Yeah, it's going to need some clothes. It's going to need to be held. It's going to need to be fed. And how is it going to get all of those things met? It's through a relationship, The human brain is built to expect care and nurturing. We're not snakes. We don't just hatch out of eggs and slither away and never see our mothers. We expect relationships, and it doesn't have to be the baby's like biological mother. This could be any caring, nurturing adult who knows what to do and cares enough to do it, right? So we're going to meet these babies' needs, and then the needs of the baby evolve, right? This baby has many different needs. This baby needs help not falling downstairs. This baby needs help learning how to feed himself, right? The needs of the baby change. And as they grow, they fail a lot, right? This baby's learning how to walk. Have you ever heard a caregiver yell at a baby after they fall down learning how to walk? We don't do that, huh? What about a baby who's like an 18-month-old baby and they're trying to talk and they say some words wrong? They don't say all the sounds. Do we send them to their room?
No.
No, we don't do that. We see all of their mistakes as a normal part of their development. And the way that we respond to that is high touch, high nurturance. Oh my goodness, you fell down, but you were trying. We're so happy. We're so proud of you. I love how you're trying to talk. That's so great. We're like really into it. We don't perceive their failures as offensive. This guy's like pooping on people and yelling a lot too. And we're still like very consistently like, we've got you. No matter what you need, like we're here for you. But then something happens. That baby is going to get a little bit older, and that baby's going to go to school. And adults are going to start treating them a little differently when they fail. Suddenly, when they fail, they're going to have adults be disappointed in them. And they're going to have adults saying things like, why can't you just focus more? Why can't you just pay attention? It seems like all of the other 9-year-olds get this and you don't. And that's a problem. Right? We're going to need to intervene. We're going to need to keep you after school, and you're not going to be able to go to recess because you can't understand these. All of these failures are no longer a part of the normal developmental sequence, and we no longer meet them with support and warmth, right? And so we also try to control them a lot. You don't really try to control a baby. You're like, baby's setting the schedule. You're just kind of like going with the flow. But as soon as they get older, it's like, oh no, it's our way. It's the adult way. Like we're going to sit in this chair for 8 hours and you will not be talking and you will not be looking anywhere except the board. Like we try to do a lot of control-based tactics to get these kids to learn. And the result is kind of lackluster. Usually we have lots of kids. We have an engagement epidemic in schools where there's kids that are just checked out. They've given up trying to meet the expectations because we've shown them time and time again that we're still frustrated and disappointed in them, and they're just trying to hang on. So from between here and here, it's like a steady stream of conditional acceptance. I'll be happy with you if when you get the good grade, we'll put it on the refrigerator and we'll tell the neighbors about it. I'm going to be disappointed in you, and I'm going to kind of use my disappointment to manipulate you. Like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. That kind of relationship, you kind of like allowing these things to crop up as wedges in your relationship. We have a one-size-fits-all approach in education with our curriculum and the whole system, right? It's not built for flexibility. It's not built for the individual. There are a lot of unrealistic expectations. Just like when we're talking about the baby, no one's expecting that baby to be able to walk or to talk. So no one's mad that it's not happening. But because we have such high expectations for kids academically, higher, I'm not saying that it's bad to have high expectations. All I'm saying is that the expectations and standards at times can be developmentally inappropriate, and that leads to frustration and kind of this cycle of judgment. We have a system of limited choice and high coercion, which makes kids feel like they need to push back against us to like kind of grab onto their freedom. And then we use punishments and rewards to manipulate kids into doing what's good for them or what we've decided is good for them. So after you look at how this gal on the right here has been experiencing all of these arrows for the last 10, 15 years of her life, like the rolled eyes kind of make sense. Like I don't want to interact with you, mom, or I'm not super excited to be with you teacher kind of makes sense, right? If you had a friend who treated you this way as an adult, probably wouldn't want to hang out with them a whole lot. You'd probably be a little prickly around them. It's very understandable. So my question is, with curriculum, how can we get from here to something that looks more like this picture, where we have teenagers, young adults who are smiling, they're engaging with their parents, they're engaging with the world, they feel confident and happy. They're well-rounded, they're mentally well, and they've been really wrapped up their whole lives. And so we're going to kind of go through some of these principles of learning and curriculum that land us here instead of here. You take a mental screenshot. This is where we don't want to be. This is where we do want to be. So to kind of unearth these things, we're going to talk about the brain a little bit. And I'm only going to use 2 big brain words, so we'll be okay. I know you guys are all very familiar with the brain stuff, so that's good. So our brain has a lot of purposes and jobs, but a big one is to keep us safe. And the way that it does this is by paying attention to cues in your environment and in your body that say we're safe right now or we're not safe. Suddenly, if this guy shows up, we're like, hey, alert, alert, we're not safe anymore. We're going to start changing what's happening here in the brain. And so we're going to talk a little bit about just a few parts of your brain and how they behave when safe and when not safe. So I did listen to the neuroscience focus group from a few weeks ago, and I know that you guys have all talked about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and that is what we're going to focus on today. So the prefrontal cortex here, the front part of your brain, doesn't start really coming online till a child is 7, doesn't finish development till about 25, late 20s, depending on the person. It's responsible for emotional regulation, planning, attention, focus, learning. It's kind of like your internal voice. It's like the mom of the brain, essentially. And so develops later and then is highly sensitive as well. It's not always online. And we're going to talk about that. Down here, you have your amygdala. And as we simplify and talk about the brain, just know that the brain is infinitely complex and we don't really understand all the inner workings. You can read a dozen research studies that say one thing and a dozen research studies that say a different thing. And I'm not a neuroscientist. So all of these concepts that we're talking about are super simplified. And I'm sure neuroscientists would just cringe at some of the things that I'm saying because they're so simplified, but that's okay. So the amygdala is kind of the fear center. It's the trigger point for your body's internal stress response. So when you're suddenly not safe, the amygdala starts changing the brain chemistry by secreting neurotransmitters that communicate, hey, we're not safe, we have a problem. And that eventually leads to this prefrontal cortex going offline. So we lose the capacity to pay attention, to manage our behavior, to inhibit our behavior and manage our emotions, to plan ahead, to learn from cause and effect, all of these things that are just what we're doing at school constantly. That part of the brain is unable to function, which is sad because, it would be really convenient if that part of the brain was on during school because that's the part of the brain that we use to learn. So the thing here is we don't see a lot of lions around town these days, but our brain still has this built-in mechanism. But research has shown that aside from physical danger, there are 3 other kind of lions, modern day lions that can trigger this. The first one is a threat to our ego or social judgment. Something new or unpredictable is the second one. And the third one is challenges to your sense of control. And if you think about school, it's pretty much a constant bath of feeling threatened, feeling like your ego is threatened, feeling like you're going to be socially judged for getting a wrong answer or for looking a certain way or dressing a certain way. There's constantly things that are new or unpredictable. Yesterday we did fractions, and now here suddenly we're talking about exponents, and I've never heard of that before, and I have no control over this. And then challenges to your sense of control. Children are not treated with, we don't assume that they need control. The goal of school is to not let kids be in control. It's to get them to be controlled. And so their sense of control is constantly challenged. So if you think about it, we've essentially built an education system that keeps kids in this chronic state of stress where they're unable to use their prefrontal cortex. And over time, this actually changes the physical structures of the brain. The prefrontal cortex will not develop, and it will get smaller, and the amygdala will become overdeveloped, and it will become larger and larger. So that's less
doing
than ideal.
different aspects until at the end, they do a whole mind map by
Hey,
themselves.
Angie, I'm gonna mute you, but I still like you. Okay, so that's the brain. Oh, sorry, I clicked off here. So I kind of want to just go through these things, because in order to make these shifts and thinking about how we are going to go about designing the curriculum of the future, it's absolutely imperative that we have these 3 lions as like at the top of everyone's list of like things to think about, because we don't want to accidentally recreate the system of education that we have now that puts kids in this situation. And so I've kind of come up with some ways of shifting our thinking as curriculum designers and educators. And we're just kind of going to go through these, and then we're going to do a little workshop-y kind of, we'll just call it a group discussion. So there's kind of 2 ways of being for each of these things. So the first one is threat to ego or social judgment, right? And so you can either show up as an educator with kind of like a carpenter mentality. And when I say carpenter, what I mean is if you see this little picture, this carpenter is working on something that has no life in it. The tree has been cut down already, and the carpenter's job is to shape and mold to act on it until it is useful or beautiful. And if it's not useful and not beautiful after the carpenter's done with it, 1, that's the carpenter's fault, and 2, I'm just going to get thrown away, right? And so if we think of our child being that thing that's being molded, that's not really how I want their teachers or my family to treat them. I don't want to treat them to be treated like a lifeless thing that's only valuable if it's useful or beautiful. And so instead of a carpenter, it's better to think about our adult role as curriculum creators or educators as more of a gardener. And a gardener looks at every seed as an individual and really thinks, man, is this an apple seed? Is this an orange seed? It's not saying, come here, squash seed, I'm going to make you be a pumpkin, right? I'm not trying to make you be anything. I'm accepting what you are. And I'm asking myself the question, what do you need? What do you need? And whatever you need, I'm going to give that to you. My job is to create an environment where you can thrive. And if I see you struggling, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say, hey, you're not good enough, and thereby trigger this stress loop. I'm going to say, hey, it seems like you have a need that's not being met. And I'm going to get really curious about that. Like if the plant is leaning over sideways, maybe that plant needs more structure and support. And I'm just going to give that plant a lattice to grow on. Maybe that's just the type of plant that really needs a lattice. Does that mean that all the seeds need lattices? No, it doesn't mean everyone needs the same treatment. But if you think about this, it's like if you are a gardener and you walk by a plant and the plant's leaves look yellow or kind of crusty, do you ever say, hey, that plant is just lazy. That plant is just making my life harder. Like if that plant wasn't in my garden, my job would be so easy. Would you ever say that about a plant? No, but we say that about kids all the time, right? That kid's just a troublemaker. That kid's just out to get me. That kid. But when we see all of their behavior and struggle as a need, then we come alongside them as a gardener and can help them get their needs met and help them grow. So that's kind of the solution to the lion of kids feeling like their egos are on the line or that they're going to be socially judged. And remember, the reason that this is so important is because that baby at the beginning, with all of those needs, that baby's brain knows that the way to survival is through that relationship. And so if we're constantly demonstrating to the baby or to the child, the student, that our relationship is on the line because you don't understand these fractions or because you can't sit still, that is what's triggering the stress response, because it's like, oh no, relationship stress means that my survival needs are at risk. And so that's why it triggers such a big response in the child. Any questions about this? Comments between carpenter and gardener type thinking? Okay, we're gonna, after we go through these, we're gonna kind of apply these to specific situations. So get excited for that. Okay, so the second one here is something new or unpredictable. And the first way of thinking is like a train conductor. Your job is to keep everybody on the tracks and on time, and everyone has to move from point A to point B. There's no deviation in destination. Everyone's just on the same track. And you see this all the time in education because we have curriculum guides and curriculum pacing that don't anticipate the needs of the individual. They're designed to get a group of people from one place to the next on a certain time. And if we fall behind that timeline, suddenly there's this big panic and the train conductor gets very upset because he wants to be on time, right? And instead of this, we can think more like a travel agent, where we see our students as individual clients that have unique destinations. And maybe one of them wants to rent a Vespa to get there, and one of them wants to go by horseback. And our job is to say, hey, where are you now? And where do you want to get? And how can I help you get there in the most interesting, fun way? So if you can kind of see the difference between how a train conductor would think or a travel agent type educator. And that helps with kids feeling like it gives the kids a sense of control because they're part of that planning process where they know, like, I have a plan, I have a goal, I've chosen the way to get there. And so they have life becomes a little bit less unpredictable for them because they're like on a track that they've helped build. And if they need to slow down, it's okay. And if they want to speed up, that's okay too. They're in more control. Speaking of control, the third one is that a challenge to your sense of control can increase your stress. The first way of thinking here is that, like, you're the manager as an educator, and your job is to like manage those outcomes and get the kids to know the stuff. And the second way is to think more like a consultant, where you might be a more experienced other. Like in business, people hire consultants who have done lots of businesses before, that have lots of experience. And then that consultant will meet with the CEO of the company who is responsible for the decision and for the outcomes of the company. But their role is to say, hey, here's what I've learned from my experience. You might want to think about this. You might want to look at this. I'm seeing these risk factors over here. It's a really collaborative experience. And then the CEO or the child, who is the CEO of their education, they can choose and they can learn from that choice. And we teach our students at Prenda that wise CEOs trust consultants, but we don't show up as managers. Okay, so we're going to put this we're going to start applying this here. So this is, you can unmute, we're going to kind of talk through this. So our first situation here says one of your students is having a hard time getting along with their peers. They're sarcastic, they're defensive, they're critical. How would a carpenter respond? And then how would a gardener respond? So what do you guys think? How would a carpenter respond to this?
Carpenter's going to put him in the corner. A carpenter's going to put them in the corner and say, "You naughty little baby, you naughty little kid." Yeah, I mean, you're just going to, like you said before, you're just going to increase the stress. You're going to increase the symptoms, increase everything you just said there. Either give him a cuddle, sit him down, chill him out, maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anyone else? How would a carpenter respond? One of the main things that we do is we interpret children's misbehavior as a personal affront. So carpenters like to get offended, where it's like, oh, you think you can talk, you're going to use sarcasm with me? That's disrespectful. You're a disrespectful person, and you deserve to be like excluded because we don't want to teach that that disrespect is okay in our community. Which triggers the stress response, which means that student is going to be to struggle more to inhibit the behavior that was the problem. And it's just going to launch this big cycle. And then we're going to be in a power struggle with them. Carpenters really find themselves in power struggles quite often because they're trying to assert control, and they're only accepting of what they deem as acceptable, which is developmentally inappropriate sometimes. Any other thoughts on carpenter? Should we move on to gardener? Okay. How do you think a gardener would respond to this?
The gardener would nurture the child, I believe, and try to help the child with the things that they're struggling with.
Yeah, totally. So you can kind of look at their behavior, like we have sarcasm, they're defensive, and they're being critical. That is no different than a plant having crunchy leaves, turning yellow, and having its flowers fall off. Those are just symptoms of a need, right? So the gardener's going to think, man, that kid is having a really hard day. Like, I bet there's something going on with that kid. That kid might feel, and then we're going to get curious and we're going to generate a bunch of hypotheses that don't turn the kid into a bad kid that needs to be excluded or punished, but they're just a kid they're a baby learning how to walk. They're a little kid learning how to talk. They're a 9-year-old learning fractions, or they're a 9-year-old who's learning how to sit still, which is a difficult developmental milestone for that 9-year-old. Yeah, so we're looking for needs as a gardener. Any other thoughts on this one? Carpenter or gardener? You guys feel kind of like you've got the hang of looking at that kind of dynamic? Cool. Okay, the second one of your students is experiencing high levels of anxiety in class. They're shut down and they're unwilling to participate. How would a train conductor respond? Remember, the train conductor wants everyone to move at the same pace and at the same time to get to the same destination. So if they're not participating, that's going to throw us off the timeline a little bit.
You would
How-
get,
It cut out a little bit.
the train conductor would get frustrated at that point,
Yeah, totally.
while the travel agent would find a way to work around it to make it work, I trust.
Yeah, and it's kind of this different ways of thinking kind of start to overlap here. So I can think of this, I can apply gardener type thinking here to think like, man, anxiety, that's a symptom. I wonder why they're feeling so anxious. And then I'm probably going to think, man, they're probably afraid that if they fail, that someone's going to be disappointed with them, that they're going to have some relationship stress with an adult because they're no longer acceptable. And then they're shutting down because they don't want to demonstrate that they don't know, because not knowing is not safe, right? So they're better to not participate and just like put their head down on their desk and like act like they're tired or something like that, than actually face the truth that like they don't understand something. And we haven't created a safe learning place for them to get what they need there. Yeah, so travel agent would be constantly creating that environment where everyone has a different path, because then this student wouldn't get to that anxious spot where they're like, oh, I feel like I'm different, I'm off track, and that's wrong. It's like, oh, but you're riding a horse and you're flying a helicopter, and like everyone's just kind of running their own race. So it's actually probably kind of fine that I'm just like going to take an extra week to learn fractions. Like there's no comparison here, right? So personalizing our curriculum and how we think about pace is really important, especially for kids who have really high anxiety, which is about a quarter of kids these days in schools statistically. 1 in 4 kids has pretty bad anxiety or depression, which is really sad, and it's largely a result to carpenter and train conductor type treatment. So gardener type thinking and traveling type thinking really help with that. Okay, any other thoughts about this? Can we move on? Okay. One of your students isn't motivated to learn. They're disengaged and resistant to any direction or instruction you offer them. How would a manager respond? How would a consultant respond?
I believe a manager would get angry and try to fire the child,
You're fired. Yeah.
as opposed to a consultant would, let's say, hold the child's hand and offer support.
Yeah, so the manager is going to feel like they're responsible, like that they own the outcome of that kid. So they're going to do all kinds of things to get that kid to get going. They're going to bribe that kid. They're going to say, hey, if you finish, we'll have a pizza party on Friday. Or like if everybody gets over a 90%, then we'll all get stickers. Or you can flip it and say, hey, if people don't do this, we're going to have to stay in from recess. And I'm going to start bribing and punishing because I own those outcomes. And I can't let us fail because I own it as the manager. As a consultant, I'm going to think, okay, well, the child owns their outcomes, and we're going to assume that the child wants their business, their education to go well. And we don't always assume that. We assume that kids are lazy and that they just want to play video games, but actually they all really want their lives to go well and they need our help to get there. But sometimes we show up in such a managerist. What's like the adjective for a manager? Managery? A managery.
Managerial. Managerial.
Managerial, yes. Okay, there is a fancy way to say it. A managerial way that they're, like, even as adults, like, you don't like it when someone tells you what to do, right? Can I get an amen on that? Like, you want to think, like, I have control of my life. My decisions matter. No one's going to be telling me what to do. Like, how helpful it is it when your partner or friend or boss comes over and says, hey, you know what? You're doing that wrong. And I want you to do it exactly like this. Like, we would never do that to each other as adults, but we do it constantly to kids. For some reason, it's just fine to treat them like that. But that's because we have this mentality that the adult owns the outcome and that the child is not responsible for their outcome. But as soon as you take that off of your mental plate and give it to the child and say, yeah, like this is your life. And this is your purpose and your direction and what you want to do with your life. And I'm here to help you. And if you fail, that's okay. You're going to get it back up and try again, but it's not me failing. It's you, right? And as soon as you take, I mean, that sounds like pretty severe actually, to kind of put that on a kid. And you want to do that in a developmentally appropriate way. I mean, you don't want to be talking to a 4-year-old about how like they need to get a job soon, right? Like that's what I'm saying. But sometimes the child needs to feel the weight, the burden of responsibility before they'll find that motivation, before they'll find that purpose. And we don't often give them the space to do that because we want to own the outcome. Okay. So essentially I'm going to paint a new picture here. Okay. When we apply these, here's how struggle looks. Remember before we had all the finger pointing? As a gardener, we're going to come alongside. We're going to see struggle as need. We're going to respond to needs. We're going to maintain warmth. This kid looks like he just probably took a toy or hit someone, and this mom is not sending him to his room. She's saying, hey, you're having a hard time. What can I help you with? We're going to personalize education. We're going to see everyone. We're going to be a travel agent. We're going to personalize that. We're going to let kids take charge with their own imagination, their curiosity. We're going to build curriculum that assumes that kids are curious and that they have questions about this world and that they're intrinsically motivated to find the answers. And then for this ownership or choice, we're going to be giving developmentally appropriate choices early on so that we can always be handing more and more ownership to the child and creating learning environments and curriculum where like the student leading is kind of built in. It's just baked into the process. And that's how we get from here to here. We have to focus on these things, which is unconditional connection, acceptance in struggle, personalized pacing, mastery, inquiry, expanding their choice, and supporting their autonomy. And if you'll notice that these things are all kind of like color-coded, you can summarize these things into these kind of categories: connection, personalization, and ownership. And there's so much research that goes through into these three things. There's a thing called self-determination theory. It's one of the best substantiated psychological frameworks since they started publishing it in like 1985. There are hundreds and hundreds of research studies, and I'll share kind of a summary of this at the end. But essentially, here we have the results of our modern day lions: anxiety, depression, hopelessness, apathy, poor academic performance. All of this self-determination theory points to a lack of these three things, resulting in these less than great outcomes, which is bad. And then the results of connection, personalization, and ownership. The research says confidence, persistence, flexibility, motivation, mental well-being, academic performance, behavior inhibition, and problem solving. And I think if you ask any adult or parent, they're like, this is the list we want. This is the happy list, right? So if we want these results, we have to build learning environments and curriculum specifically that build in connection, personalization, and ownership. That's the roadmap to getting these results. So when we have these things in place, we can keep the stress response at bay, and the little amygdala will not have to fire. And then we can keep the prefrontal cortex online, which means that we can learn. And that is all I have to share today. So this is my information. We can like chat about anything that you guys are interested in chatting about. If you want to talk about how we can apply these things to the curriculum we're building or in different learning environments, like I'm open to that. Whatever you guys want to do is great. And then
I would definitely, I'm sorry, but I really appreciate the presentation. I'd love to hear how you guys are implementing some of these ideas.
Sure, yeah, at Prenda specifically. I'm gonna pull up this. Hold on real quick. And I'll share this. I'm just gonna kind of give you a little overview. This is Prenda's theory of action. And this is like the research basis for why we focus on these three things. There's a rationale and then kind of just little bullet points of truth and then the research that supports it. And you can just read through these bullet points and you'll get a really good idea of how we've put all of this stuff together to prioritize creating these learning environments. So I will put that in the chat and I'll get that to you as well, Amber. So at Prenda, we focus on, I'll just go in order. So the way that we do connection is we have our teachers, or we call them guides. From the beginning, we train them to understand what is called attachment psychology or attachment theory. There's kind of different developmental theories in psychology and learning. And one of them takes a very behavioralist approach where it's like, you have to set really strict like rules and procedures, and there's lots of if thens and consequences, and we're just trying to extrinsically motivate with stickers and bribes, or taking like essentially carrots and sticks approach to getting kids to learn, versus a developmental approach or an attachment-based approach, which assumes that the kid is going to be naturally driven by relationship. And so one of my favorite, there's a really great resource called the Neufeld Institute. I know I've talked to Amber about it a little bit, but Dr. Gordon Neufeld, he's in Canada. My favorite quote of his is a child's heart finds something to attach to and then becomes like it. So if we want our kids to be curious, and if we want them to be lifelong learners, and if we want them to be scrappy and persistent, like we need to form really strong attachments with them, and then we need to model that to them. And that's how the human brain really actually learns, because it thinks, hey, who's in charge of taking care of me? Who's in charge of my survival? This person? Okay, then I am like a little duck going to follow that person and do what they do. And if that person is having a negative attitude about learning or working or being productive, like I'm just going to model that, right? But if that person in their free time is reading books, and if that person in their free time is thinking, I'm so curious about how black holes work, I'm gonna, like out loud narrate, like I'm just gonna go research that. It's like, oh, the adults that take care of me, and the skills that I'm going to need to become like this adult that is able and capable of caring for me and protecting me is curiosity and persistence and humility, and all of these things that we want to model to our kids. So we just take a really strong approach. We work a lot with our guides in building that relationship and then being that example and then we consistently preach against using bribes and rewards and punishments and things like that. Because it's just so counter to what the child's brain really needs, which is that unconditional positive regard, unconditional acceptance. And I'm not saying like kids can do whatever they want and we don't have to set boundaries or anything for them. Like kids absolutely need structure. They absolutely need appropriate boundaries, but we can do those things in love instead of with force. And then they'll accept them and kind of internalize those and grow up being more values driven instead of reward or punishment driven, if that makes sense. Any thoughts on that? That's just how we approach connection. Oh, the other thing is that our class sizes are super small. We only serve 10 kids at a time. And so in a classroom, so hard to differentiate your instruction, to make sure all of those needs are met, and then to also be kind of like the mom, the dad of the group, to make sure everyone's emotional needs are met. It's nearly an impossible thing to do with 30 kids, 25 kids. So we keep our class sizes super small, and then we use a bunch of adaptive diagnostic like ed tech tools to do most of the differentiation. So that's moving over into being a travel agent. It's like we have a suite of curriculum instead of like, this is the Prenda curriculum. And so we'll have 10 kids sitting around the same table. They'll be age mixed, and we'll do adaptive diagnostic testing in math and reading to kind of get like adequate placement levels. So they're not wasting their time. They're like really like all of their educational minutes are personalized. We don't do any whole group instruction. And then everyone sets a long-term goal, and just every day their whole like academic time part of their day is just dedicated to those long-term goals, and they're just running their own race at their own pace with their own curriculum that they've chosen with their parents. So we're trying to build that culture where it's like, it's okay that I don't know this, because there's not like we're not all on the same in this, like in our lanes racing, we kind of made it harder to see that.
That sounds so much like Montessori. Is that like foster students, Amber?
Sorry, foster students?
The foster curriculum, because or Forest. I'm sorry.
Forest, oh. Now, would you say that's relatable to Forest School at all, Katie?
Forest School, like in Atlanta?
Oh, it's all around the world.
Just forest schools in general, broad term. Okay, yeah, there's a school in Atlanta called the Forest School, but that is very similar to us. So the closest, I think that the philosophy, I almost think that this is the type of relationship, or sorry, the type of education that Maria Montessori would have invented if she lived in our day, because she used the tools of her day, which were made of wood and very beautiful.
Yes.
And today we have computers and technology that allow this personalization, right? In a Montessori classroom, you walk in and the teacher kind of instructs you in those works, is what they call them. And you gain proficiency in a work, and then you have an individual list of works that you're going to do for that day. And you're in charge of managing your time around getting those things done, which is the same underlying like foundational principle of like, hey, here is a math curriculum and you're going to choose this, and I'm going to kind of show you how it works, and you're going to set your own goal. And then when you get stuck, you can come to me and we can work on it together, but I'm going to teach you how to learn, not what to learn, which I think is kind of the beauty behind Montessori too. So very similar in philosophy. Our classrooms don't look like Montessori classrooms though. They're not full of like beautiful wood blocks or anything.
That's cool though, you have multi-age, and I love the
Yeah, it's multi-age. That's another thing in
yeah,
common.
and the student-centered approach, and it sounds like you have individualized learning plans, which is
Mhm. Yeah,
very
our day is split between a mastery-based focus and an inquiry-based focus. So all of these kind of hard skills like math and reading and writing, those are kind of our mastery-based skills where like kids can be learning independently on their own kind of timetable. But then we put all the computers away and we'll do like a collaborative whole group science experiment or social studies deep dive or something, but it's not the teacher teaching that, it's the kids asking questions. Like there'll be a student leader and they'll have a Socratic discussion or a debate about something. They'll figure out what they're curious about, and then we curate a bunch of resources and like fundamental questions around big topics like World War II or like all of these things in history or science. And then they choose how they're going to demonstrate their learning for that element. And they can do a talk show, they can make a video, they can make a blog, they can like do an art gallery. Like the sky's the limit for producing and demonstrating your actual learning. So that's one way we've brought in personalization and ownership. There's lots of choice and voice built in, and very little, like the goal, I think when most Prenda classrooms start, it's the kids don't really know how to function like that because they've always been told what to do. So there's kind of this like deschooling thing that happens the first few months, and the guide is really leading out and that demonstrating these new patterns of learning. Like, here's how we do a Socratic discussion, or here's how debate works, or here's how how we can explore this logic concept using this tool. And then over time, the students are like, oh, I'm the student leader for Collaborate, is what we call it this week. And I want to do a Socratic discussion about the environment. And I'm going to go find a resource, and everyone's going to read that. And then we're going to come together and discuss it. And then we'll log our learning in some interesting way. So it's very student led.
That's very cool. How would you say would be the best way to transition from the carpenter, conductor, manager mindset in public schools into the, gardener, travel agent, consultant?
There are some system level constraints that really get in the way of those things. So the first level is changing the hearts and minds of teachers just so they treat children differently. Like, be a little bit warmer, be a little bit more patient, consider the child's needs. Like, there are baby steps that you can take in your own classroom without changing any of the system. But then it's like your principal shows up and it's like, hey, 40% of your kids are not on track because you chose to let them explore their curiosity instead of like exposing them to this curriculum. And there are actually, so that's one, tension point where there's actually like legislation that dictates that all 9-year-olds have to be exposed to X, Y, and Z in this year. And it's like, well, if that thing that was so important to expose kids to, say it's whales or on dinosaurs or something like that, perhaps none of the children were interested in that, then they're going to be really disengaged and they're going to think, oh, I don't really like learning because this is boring and I'm not interested in whales. Like, I want to talk about gardening or like whatever my thing is. And there's a balance here. This is where we get into inquiry-based learning, where there are certain things that kids really should be exposed to. But does it matter if they are exposed to them when they're 9 or when they're 10? I don't know. I'm like less convinced of that. So maybe loosening up some of those, like, here's what kids are supposed to learn, like scope and sequence documents and like the legislation that kind of gives teeth to those things. I think if we saw that open up, that would allow this type of treatment of children to like flourish in public schools more. The thing that we've come up against is it's actually illegal to, like all 4th graders in public school have to be exposed to the 4th grade standards. And so if a child is taking an adaptive diagnostic test that shows me that they're 3 years behind, they're working at a 1st grade level, the best I can do in that classroom is say, okay, you're going to have to listen to my 4th grade level stuff for a half an hour. And then I'm going to give you 10 minutes of differentiated instruction at the 1st grade level. So that's, we survey all of our kids coming in. We've surveyed thousands of kids and we ask them before Prenda, like, describe your learning time. Were you bored during classroom instruction? Were you lost, or was it just right? And fully 2/3 of kids tell us year after year that they were either bored or lost. And so we're only serving 1/3 of the kids with this kind of like age-based dosing that we're doing. If you have 25 kids in the classroom, you have 25 different levels of comprehension and understanding. And in the past, we really haven't had what we needed, the tools that we needed to differentiate fully and give people personalized instruction, but we can do it now. So another move would be, and this is happening all over in other countries. Unfortunately, the United States is slow to pick this up, but just letting ed tech lead in that differentiation, and then using teachers and mentors as support to that core instruction. We have it flipped in the United States where we're still doing group dosing, whole instruction, and then we're supplementing and augmenting with ed tech, and it needs to be flipped. So in a Prenda classroom, all of it's very data driven, and you're always, at least for those mastery-based subjects, learning things that are totally right on your, it's called your zone of proximal development, like that Goldilocks zone of like not too hard, not too easy. We call it their learning frontier to the kids, and they're all supposed to come to understand that, like, man, if something's too easy, that's a waste of my time, and I'm disrespecting my future self by allowing this to be easy. I need to raise my hand and say, hey, this is too easy. I need to like turn my goal up. I need to get into some more challenging, we call it being a challenge seeker, having this mentality that like, I always want to be pushing the envelope. But you can't do that in a traditional classroom because of the whole group pace. So that's another thing I would push on for public schools.
So you said that's differentiated learning, correct?
Yeah, beginning, like all of the minutes need to be differentiated, not the leftover minutes.
Okay.
Like after, so we do that survey and it's fully 2/3 of kids who are saying that wasn't working for me. And after 6 months of Prenda, 75 to 80% of kids are saying I'm where I need to be all the time. So
Wow.
that to me is a huge improvement in the data.
Yes, sounds like you guys are doing wonderful things there. So Angel, she does teacher training and social emotional learning. Is it all right if we quickly go around and all introduce ourselves? Angel, would you start?
Sure. I'm Angel Staley. I was just listening. I've been listening in most of the time I was been on, but the differentiating instruction is actually something that I present on with teachers. I have the professional learning, an online presentation that I do, just kind of, like you said, you're only teaching to part of a third of the class if you're teaching to these standards. So you still have to teach the standards because we have those standardized tests, and find a way to reach them all. I just had a conversation with a lady talking about how some kids can't express themselves in a standardized test. Like they, if you teach me Spanish, I can answer questions about grammar all day long, but I can't have a conversation effectively. So it's like, what is their conversation? Is it an art project? Is it, building instead of the measurements of the building, I want to show you how I would build building and then work backwards. So, yeah. So I also do trauma informed learning,
Love.
and I'm a yoga instructor. So all the things.
That's awesome. I love it.
Ben, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ben. Yeah, I'm a student at the moment. I'm just sort of I'm kind of all this stuff is sort of more of a interest to me. I'm sort of in the process of trying to build my project, which is around education and wellbeing. So all of this is super interesting for me. That's kind of, I think that's it for now.
Wonderful. Jamal, if you don't care to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi there, I'm Jamal DePina. I do technical consulting, and I have 5 children, and the youngest are 5 and 11. So very interesting time to be learning about these processes. I did Montessori in kindergarten, well, around those years, right? My kindergarten years. So I'm fascinated by the different concepts, and yeah, appreciate your input, Katie. Good stuff.
Yes, I can't thank you enough. I have one thing I'd like to say briefly. So it's just that the goal of this focus group is to gather input, expertise, and diverse perspectives on childhood education and curriculum development. This focus group serves as a platform for educators, parents, researchers, and other stakeholders to come together and collaborate on shaping effective educational practices and policies. Also, we welcome you guys to join us at all the focus group meetings, including this childhood education curriculum meeting, which is the 4th Wednesday of every month. Sorry, I know that was sort of out of turn there, but I really can't thank y'all enough for joining. And does anyone else have anything to add onto Katie's presentation?
I had a question.
Go for it.
Go for it. You were talking about that adaptive diagnostic testing. What does that actually, is that covering just, where they're at in their learning journey, I'm guessing, is that looking at their cognitive functions, their cognitive skills, their emotional skills? Is it looking at sort of that whole broad area?
No, it's really focused on those mastery based, like math and reading. And then, because those are like if you think about kind of like building a child's foundation, we all talk about curiosity and love of learning, and like we want to like know all these things, but there are certain skills that allow you to access all of that curiosity and implement. And so we want to make sure that those foundational skills are really strong. And that's something that gets lost a lot in learner-centered programs, where it's like, well, maybe they just don't want to read until they're 12. And it's like, Yeah, but we do kind of want to introduce that and give them the building blocks that they're going to need to be able to execute the personal purpose for their learning that they discover, right? So we take a really like concrete view on those few things, and then a very like choice student-based approach on a lot of other things. So we feel like it's like the key, like the access point.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
But yeah, the adaptive diagnostics are just for that. We don't test anything else. We try to keep testing to a minimum, actually.
Oh, no, yep.
That's great. Katie, I have to ask, are you familiar with democratic education?
Yes, actually, I was just this weekend in New York at the Arrow Foundation presenting at, are you familiar with them? Arrow, you guys should be friends with them.
AERO?
I did their
You did it?
I did their assessment about 2 years ago. I did their assessment myself as part of my journey into looking into
Oh, good.
why I was
Yeah.
struggling in certain areas. So I did their, that's Aerosmith, yeah? Aerosmith?
We might be
Aerosmith
talking
school?
about different things.
Oh,
Arrow
okay.
is, but I want to know about that. That sounds interesting. What I'm talking about is Arrow, AERO, Alternative Education Resource Organization. They help people start schools. They've been around for like 30 years or 40 years. Like it's like they've been doing this alternative education work for a long time, and they are all about like unschooled democratic schools. And we actually had at this conference some democratic school leaders come from Ukraine who have been running a democratic school throughout the war. And they turned their school into a shelter, and then they had to build a bomb shelter to continue their school. And it was just so interesting and humbling to hear their experience. It's really neat. So democratic school is very beautiful, a very beautiful approach too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating how the children take ownership in their learning and the management of the school.
Yeah.
That's very encouraging.
Yeah, Sudbury model, if you're familiar with that.
Mhm.
Sudbury model.
Yep,
Mhm.
Massachusetts.
And I
Yeah.
met Peter Gray. Have you read Free to Learn?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you guys should all read this book. It's too high for me to get. It's called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. He is a huge proponent of self-directed learning. And he was there at the conference and I got to meet him. It was such a pleasure. But a great book. He talks a lot about how kids learn how kids learn in hunter-gatherer civilizations, and how it's all done by modeling and very, very little direct instruction. And the kids have a lot of freedom very early, and they learn to be very responsible and careful because they feel that burden of like, I gotta take care of myself. At the same time, the adults are very nurturing and very forgiving and think very highly of the children instead of, you guys are lazy bums, which is typically what Americans tend to, or people in the Western world tend to think about kids.
I was watching a thing yesterday on, it was just a guy visiting the Maasai culture in Kenya, but you just see how happy and relaxed they all are, and it just made me think about, it'd be so fascinating to scan their brains, just like measure the electrical signals of their brains and their kids as well, and just see the vast differences, because they're like sort of a hunter-gatherer, well, they're more of a, not so much these days, but yeah, to see those differences within the networks in the brain, how they've developed brain regions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am talking to a friend about doing a study that puts like a biometric, like Apple Watch on kids and measures like their stress indicators all day at school, to see if the learning environment and quality of adult-child relationship like mitigates that stress. Like it's really fascinating. So in the link here that I put up in the chat, if you find the section on attachment, one of the points is that a strong adult presence, a strong like nurturing presence is enough to mitigate the long-term academic effects of socioeconomic status, like trauma and all sorts of things, like so protective.
Wow.
Well, that's the problem we've got today, isn't it? Now with like with all this great stuff that you guys are doing there, all the state schools, those kids are going to get left behind because they're not going to adapt quick enough, are they? Their sort of learning environments aren't. It's not because it's not a private education. It has to go. yeah, it's almost feel like the government funded schools, the kids there are going to get left behind massively. I suppose they already are, aren't they, really? So,
Yeah,
they
so
already are.
some exciting things, at least for the last 5 years at Prenda, like 97% of our kids have actually been state funded. So they're not happening, our schools aren't happening in, well, we do have several schools that happen, micro schools that happen inside of public schools, where like a progressive principal that wants these things for some of their kids he's like literally turned an old teacher's lounge into kind of like a mini classroom and given a paraprofessional, we've trained her as a guide, and he puts all of his like problem kids in that class. It's like, oh, this kid is just having a really hard time with anxiety, let's put him in the Prenda class. This kid is 3 years behind Prenda class. And so, and you go in there and the kids are so happy and they're just like, we're a family, and they're just loved on and nurtured, and they feel so empowered. And so yeah, Prenda's, we definitely have a heart for access and like getting this into schools, and keeping it affordable. Have you guys been following the school choice ESA movement in the States? So that's another way that kids who would typically be in public schools and maybe don't have access to like a private school, or that maybe would be like a Montessori school or something like that, a way for them to have access to this type of education, an access point. Because my kids do this program in Arizona, and like I am able to participate in Prenda free of charge to me, and then I have extra money left over to do like swimming and karate and all of this stuff, that, like, because my kids aren't in a traditional school where they would be getting PE, so then I'm able to choose those activities that are kind of beneficial to the other parts of their development. So it's,
Yeah, that's fascinating what they're doing with that. Here it's like $6,000 or $7,000 per child. I see it would be a lot more economical just to improve public school, but I appreciate the initiative, of them. And I didn't know that the leftover money could go towards like extracurricular. That's really cool.
And it's actually only 90, it's actually more economical than the public school, because all of that is only 90%, at least in Arizona, 90% of what would be typically spent on a public school attendee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's less money than you'd get in public schools, but and it's different. Like if you have an IEP, or if your child has autism, you can get up to $24,000 per year.
Oh, wow.
And all of that money rolls over and you can spend it on college. So it's like a really good program.
Wow.
For kiddos. And
So-
typically, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this. Can you explain that? Like, so the state gives you money to choose your school versus making them go to a public school.
Yeah. So I just put in the chat, it's called an empowerment scholarship account. If you Google that, like in Arizona, you'll find lots of things about that. They just passed this law in Arkansas, Utah, Florida, West Virginia, and there are maybe like 10 or 12 other states that have it up for discussion. Arizona is the first state to pass it last year. And it's actually existed for a while for kids, but it's been hard to access that money. You have to have had an IEP, been a foster child, come from a failing school district, or had your parents in the military. There are kind of some reasons you could maybe get access to this program, but now in Arizona, they just passed that anyone can apply. You don't have to have any sort of specific qualifications. They also do it based on income in some states. So it'll not be available to families that have a lot of money, but most like access to most like middle class families. Yeah, so you just fill out a form, and then there's usually like kind of like a third party like program administrator company. In Arizona, it's called Class Wallet. In Florida, it's called Step Up for Students. And the government does not give me money. It puts money in this account for my child that then I control. So when I want to pay my guide and pay Prenda for their services for my kids, Prenda invoices me, and I just upload the invoice to this account, and it's paid out of this account. And I can get reimbursement for buying books, buying art supplies, taking my kids to horseback riding lessons, like anything that I typically wouldn't have access to can be used as long as it's educational. And they look at all of the receipts, like there is regulation around that, but there's no requirements, like in Arizona, at least, like the kids don't have to take any state tests, like you can use religious curriculum. Nobody is monitoring to see that like the fourth graders get exposed to the right things. Like there's complete educational freedom and support with those state funds, which is incredible.
Wow, I love that. Kind of, I don't know how to say this politically correct. I'm gonna just do the best I can. It kind of levels the playing field for middle class to upper class. And I mean, not that, I grew up middle class, so not that I could never reach upper class, you know what I'm saying? But it kind of starts you all at first base versus somebody starting on third base. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah, definitely. Like suddenly you could be sending your child to a fancy private school instead of their neighborhood school. And not that their neighbor, like, it is a very hotly debated political issue because I think people are worried that it's going to take kids away from the public schools. But my thinking is that only kids that were like, lots of people love public school and they love their teacher and they love their classroom and like it's working for them. There's that bucket of kids where it's totally fine. Everyone's so happy. We don't want to change that, but there's a ton of kids in there that it's not working for. And it's causing a lot of these symptoms in their mental health, or, they're not really able to access the education as it's being presented. So for those kids where it's not working, it gives them a choice to go get what they need. And it puts kind of the power of choice in the parents' possession because they're the expert in the child. They know what the child needs. So, and typically when it's passed, they will also pass a really substantial, at least what we're seeing nationally is that they'll pass a really substantial teacher raise and investment in public schools along with this program. So they're not like transitioning away from public schools. It's like, we're just going to fund choice and we're going to fund our schools. Is what yeah.
Wow.
That is wonderful. Well, all right, looks like we're over time. Again, I can't thank you all enough for coming today. If anyone has anything else, I'm happy to listen. And if not, I invite you all to join on Wednesday, June 5th. We have our nutrition focus group meeting. And very exciting. We have presentations for all focus group meetings currently, so it's pretty exciting. We actually might have a former Olympian during part of the presentation at this Wednesday's meeting. She might join in. She does child athlete nutrition, so that's very cool.
That is very cool.
Again, I invite you all to join all the focus group meetings, and I'm very encouraged by tonight's meeting. I think we really embodied the spirit of this focus group with all you spoke of, Katie, and everyone's input. And again, I thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you.
This was great. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. You guys have a
Thanks,
wonderful.
guys. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I just made you the host again, Amber, so.
Okay, cool. That's why I couldn't
Be in
stop.
control. Probably gonna want to do that.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you.